that's got to be a weird feeling. Is that you realize you were in handcuffs, you were kicked off, you were charged, and now you're back. I mean, you talk about trust issues. I mean,
Oh yeah,
inherently,
they were laughing in the office. The cars that were in the parking lot. Like I didn't earn an absurd amount of money, and I basically drove the same car driving into that job as the one that I left that job just for discretion purposes. But some of the absurdity you would see in those parking lots after these changes were made, it was pretty fascinating. The overt nature of the corruption was like, oh yeah, we're not going to hide it anymore. Let's take my Hummer H2 to work. Um, I was sent to work for the governor for a bit, and I basically ran security for the governor of Baja for about 3 years to be exact. So I took care of him and his family, did a great job there. Man was amazing. His family was amazing. They did a lot of good for the state as well.
was he highly targeted?
Yeah, he was very targeted. I ran a protection detail that was based off Muhammad Karzai's detail in Afghanistan. Basically, that's the same detail profile that we ran for the governor of Baja during that time.
Wow. So he's dodging bullets too.
Oh yeah, we got in a few
bombs.
We got in a few shootouts outside of his house. Hopefully one day I can get him on a conversation podcast so we can talk about some of those issues that we went through. But it was rowdy. At the end of that, I was sent back to operations. Again, it's Mexico. I was at the next to the governor, and now I'm back in operations. And when I got back is when I started noticing all the changes. All these people were back. I was placed in a security position with one of the directors there, and one of the guys that I still trusted, so one of the old school guys. And we did a lot of work for about 2 years until he was moved, and I had no other place to hide in, basically, to keep off going down that path. I was called into the office. They were going to be given new orders by the new director, and he basically said, "You are either working for us or you're working against us," basically, in a clear, direct way. I got out of the office and said I needed to work on something and figure something out. I printed out my resignation and signed it and left that same day. People that were at the office couldn't figure it out. They were like, what's going on? Like, they couldn't see me leaving. I've been there for so long, and leaving that job in Mexico, it's job security. There's not a lot of it in Mexico. So it's, you either have cancer or somebody wants to kill you when you leave a job like that,
But had you, obviously you didn't make that decision, but what were the dilemmas if you had stayed on but refused to align with them? What do you think realistically would have happened to you?
I'd be probably put in a horrible job position somewhere all the way at the bottom, and be pressured and pushed out anyway in some way, shape, or form. This is what happened.
Would you have been targeted for a hit?
Maybe. Specifically, I knew I was going to be targeted if I said yes. So I left that same afternoon. A lot of questions were around my exit. Like, did he find $1 million in a wall somewhere? Was he involved and he left because they were on to him, or a bunch of rumors of that nature?
What year was that?
God, that's 16, I think. 16, 17. Yeah. I just lost my mother probably like a few days before that happened. So I was going through it. My mom had a lot of health issues and some psychiatric issues for the last years of her life. And I was basically a new father taking care of her. And also I had the job that I had. So I was spread thin, and I didn't have a lot of options.
Well, the SEALs say that's called stabbing the lifeboat. It's like you stab the lifeboat. It's like you got no choice but to make a decision now, right? So you stabbed the lifeboat. You turned in your letter. So what did you do?
Well, it's funny enough you say the SEALs. I had a friend that I met through some of the work that I did and basically conversations. Who's a Navy SEAL reservist and beautiful wife Kelly, who we had developed a friendship over the years, and they offered me a place to stay if anything ever happened, basically. And something did happen. You know, you want to talk about who like knowing who your friends are. You know, this is when you know who your friends are. It's fascinating how everybody goes away when you're not who you were. You know, I had already talked to them about this possibility of me having to leave, and they offered a place for me and my family to stay. And I'm married to an American, and my daughter's American. So, but in my mind, I'd never thought about myself going to the U.S. and living in the U.S. and doing all these things. So I didn't have a choice. They didn't even give me my liquidation money. Like, it was that quick and fast. It was like, leave now. I crossed the border into San Diego and started my process that same day.
Man, what about your home, your belongings, all that other stuff?
Abandoned. Everything had abandoned. Everything was left. It was just me and my 2.5-year-old at the time in my arms, and a duffel bag with just the essentials. And I crossed the border, and I was quietly sitting in an avocado orchard that same night, contemplating my next move as a human being, with my friend Dan, who giving me a shot of tequila.
Well, you are in an avocado orchard.
What?
You were in an avocado orchard, so tequila fits.
Yeah, I mean, it was the quietest I'd been for over 12 years. And I used to run around with 2 phones, a radio, a SATCOM radio, and
always be on call. And now you're not needed.
Now I don't have anything. Now I'm naked, basically. I'm a naked skeleton sitting in an avocado orchard next to another weird naked skeleton, too, in a way we all are.
Well, if tequila's involved, there's a chance you actually were naked, but we won't ask about that.
There was some nudity. There was some nudity probably at some point.
Hey, well, before we get too far down the road on this, though, something that came out of your time, which is what we want to talk about now, too. You have a site called edsmanifesto.com. A lot of great stuff there. But you're doing some unique stuff now, and it's based upon observations you made while you were doing the work. So let's talk about that. You started because obviously you ran into a lot of people that, whether they're kidnapped or being restrained or people being taken against their will, you started noticing things. And one of them that I found interesting was there was a kid that was arrested one night, put in the back of a patrol car, and he got out of his handcuffs, and one of the other guys wanted to go, whoop up on him. You said, no, wait a minute. Yeah. Let me talk with him. Let me figure out, how the hell did you do this?
Yeah. Well, so I grew up as a street kid in a lot of ways. I skateboarded. I was very independent from like 13 on forward, basically. I moved out of my house.
Did I just hear a rooster in the background?
Oh, yeah. This is how you know. This is how you know. This is how you know.
I kept thinking, wait a minute, I got my window shut this time. My cat's actually being quiet, and I'm going, I hear it. Do I hear a rooster?
This is on my end. There's a rooster next door. I grew up as a street kid, skateboarded, and did a lot of bad stuff, too, because, again, never dreamed about being a cop. So I had a lot of that in me. My mom was a devout Catholic, and we grew up in my family as Guadalupano, so religion was very big. Golden rules and the 10 commandments were drilled into me, basically. So I never took anything personal. I wasn't one of those guys that was on an ego trip when I was wearing a badge or working. I saw humanity in everybody. I think 2 of the things that changed my life was my mom saying to me, nobody's against you, they're for themselves. Learn this and you will be better off. And my dad said, never let anybody own you. I think both of those things kind of kept me alive during that time. Every time I would grab somebody and they would showcase something interesting, I would take a picture of it. I would write down some things or a video, and I would share it with my people. Hey, look at this weird thing that I just found out. A burglar that we found who was breaking into these high-value neighborhood places was utilizing expansion foam to drown out the sonic alarms outside of houses. And that was fascinating that they were doing that. So I wrote that down and took some pictures and shared them on a blog that I used to run, an anonymous blog that I used to run on Tumblr. It was called, Ed's Manifesto. That's where it started, basically. So not only was I writing some of these down and having conversations with some of these criminals and some of these people that knew things that I didn't know, I was learning from them. I was also sharing it openly. When I say openly, I mean I was posting some of these things online and like, hey, have you ever seen anything like this? And people would be like, oh, what's that? Slowly but surely that anonymous account gained a cult following, then switched to Facebook and then Instagram. But
how
everything
long did it stay anonymous?
It stayed anonymous for as long as I was still active. Basically, as soon as I started being a bit more known publicly, when I started working for the governor of Baja, basically, and my face was on the newspaper every now and then because I was standing next to him. I'd show a little bit more of who I was and where I was, when I left the job and went to the U.S., I mean, it was basically, I figured that I had to be a bit more public with it, I guess, because there was not a lot of other things I was doing. So I started being more in the open, showing my face more and talking a little bit more about my history while I was out. And it turned into a lot of training opportunities. People wanted to learn some of the things that I learned while I was down there.
Let's talk about that for a second. I mean, let's talk about a couple of things that you discovered. What were a couple of the things that when you discovered them, you go either like, oh shit, that guy could have done that to me, or at some point you asked this guy, how the hell did you think of this? Right. I mean, what did you do? It's the old trick we used to teach rookies too. Always make sure you look up. Where did a lot of burglars, you get called out in the middle of the night? Where would they hide? They hide in a tree because a lot of times the cops wouldn't look up. They'd just look on the ground. Right. That's kind of basic stuff, but what impressed you, or how did you go about finding out from these guys? How did you think about this problem? What was the way you looked at the problem different than we were to enable you to figure out how to get out of handcuffs or flexicuffs, or like using that sonic phone that you were talking about, or that expansion phone?
Yeah, I mean, mine's at first. Not being allowed to and not being able to are two completely different things. That's a red pill you take. These people have that red pill. They've been experimenting, utilizing monkey do, monkey see, experimentation, actually doing things live and seeing things and learning through experience. You have a cadet coming out or a police officer coming out who is trained to basically handcuff people in a certain way. And there's people that learn how to get out of these specific situations by learning through seeing somebody go through it and figuring out how to hide things, how to conceal things. We found a guy with a handcuff key super glued between his fingers like that, right? And I remember seeing that and actually being the one that searched them, didn't find that.
And for folks, we're on the podcast, folks can't see it, but you held up like your index and your middle finger, and it's like in the V.
Yeah, so he basically cut off the ring off the key and put and super glued it in between his index and middle finger. He was handcuffed. They did a shitty job handcuffing him. He didn't put him palms out and key way up like you should, but still, he was handcuffed, and he got free. Couldn't figure out where that was, and through a conversation with him, he's like, yeah, so, this is like, I told him, like, where'd you learn that? It's like, oh, some weird Cuban dude showed me. Oh, cool. Where did he show you this? I said, oh, there's a few Cuban people around showing things like this. It's like, oh, that's cool. What else did they show you? And he proceeded to take this magnet clasp off of this necklace that he had on. I think he was probably a santero or some sort of Afro-Caribbean necklace that he had on for protection. So he takes it off, and it has a magnet clasp on it, so he can't be strangled with it. So he's smart about that too. He spun the magnet clasp on his finger, and he said, "Put a key in your pocket." So I grabbed the handcuff key and put it in my pocket. And as he was basically sliding that magnet clasp around me, doing a pat down, the key and the magnet reacted together. Tick. So he found a key where it was hiding. So he said, if you ever want to search somebody and you're looking for something small and metallic, just string a magnet on your finger, and you can basically carry with you a metal detector, on your hand, if you're really worried about somebody hiding something of this nature. And I was like, okay, that's creepy, and I will take that into account. So I wrote that shit down, and along with a lot of other things that I basically wrote down and stored and practiced and figured out for myself. A lot of these things were basically learned to then show to the newer guys that were coming on our unit.
So I got to tell you, when I was a rookie police officer, Salina, Kansas, one of your rites of passage was they would do what they would call, it was called railing. They would handcuff you to the rails. One arm on each side, because we had this stairway that went up to municipal court, and there were these metal square rails on each side. Well, the way they'd always set it up is, the lieutenant would call you and said, "We're doing a weapons check." So, they had the sand pit there. You empty out we had revolvers, empty it out, hand it to them. And then the guys would attack you. And the goal was you had to resist. And this is back in the day when you could do that stuff. Well, I had been given a little bit of I'd heard somebody talking about it, and I said, well, if somebody ever got the drop on me and handcuffed me, what would I do? Well, remember those old black leather boots you had them? They had the straps on the side, you'd wear them. Well, I took a spare handcuff key and I hid it inside of the straps of one of those. I cut a little thing and hid it down in there. Big mistake, my friends, because what I realized is when I uncuff myself, and I think I'm being pretty smart, I got stripped down even farther next time when they handcuffed me to the rails. There was no hiding the key that I could reach anywhere there.
Yeah. If you're going to do any trick like that, only works once. There's no doing it twice. I mean, the rule is if they find one thing, you're naked.
Yeah.
If they find one thing, you're naked.
Bingo. I wasn't quite naked, but let's put it this way: there was no way I was going to be able to hide anything. So
yeah, and a lot of the ways that these guys are learning is also through hazing rituals. And hazing rituals, I know the U.S. has been slowly kind of getting rid of a lot of them, but they have a place.
I think they serve absolutely. I think they serve a purpose.
We got put through a lot. And every now and then I hear some horror stories of people going through the military hazing rituals in the U.S. And I'm like, we were actually physically beaten with sticks and punched in the face several times during our training. But what I mean with the hazing ritual aspect of it, these guys are learning through experiences. When I started showing some of this stuff in the U.S., they would be like, hey, did you learn this through your military training? Like, was this shown by you by some sort of specialty people? Like, no, these are all criminal. This is all criminal methodology that I'm learning. It's like, well, why were they sharing that with you? You'd be surprised. Some people just want to talk. If you're not a piece of shit human being, give them a cigarette and allow them to, make a supervised call to their mother to just tell them to not worry because he's not going to make it to home for Christmas. You can sit down with some of these people and learn some of these things. And also, if you don't know what you're looking at, you won't see it. So once you start delving into site exploitation and seeing open laptops and seeing some of their browsing histories and looking at what they were looking at online, you start realizing how they were kind of looking at problems. We ran into a group that was abducting people at an industrial scale in Baja, and we got to see their laptops. One of them had an open laptop in one of the houses that we found, and they were researching civilian seer training in the United States. So they were researching how to get out of zip ties and basically fortifying their zip ties so that exploitation can be utilized on the zip ties that we're putting on people. Or they were seeing the proliferation of these plastic handcuff keys that were all of a sudden being put out. So they evolved their methodology so that when they would handcuff people, they would handcuff them and tie the handcuffs to their necks so they couldn't lower them to get out. Because a lot of the businessmen and a lot of the people that were working in Baja at that time started getting counter-kidnap training from Americans or from Israelis. And it's an arms race. It's always an arms race. And I think what I brought new to the whole scene as far as training goes is I started getting involved in live conversations with some of these people to try and figure some of these things out.
Very smart. It's led to a business for you now.
It's more than a business. We do a lot of advocacy. I work a lot of charities on both sides of the border. We run a program for a fighting school in Tulum in Mexico, basically feeding up and coming professional fighters.
Why professional fighters?
Because they don't have any money to follow their dreams, and I was there in the past, so I'm basically trying to find ways of giving back to that aspect of my past, I guess. And there's definitely an aspect of seeing these young animals training themselves up that reminds me of a lot of the young men and women that I lost along the way working.
Well, yeah, and Mexico, I mean, one thing there's a great history of is a lot of the fighters too. Man, you look at some of the great fighters, welterweights, bantamweights, whatever, but a lot of the great ones come out of Mexico.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up boxing. That's how I got this nose. I was
going to say, I thought that came from the hazing and getting hit with the sticks and the.
Later on, I basically I thought about getting a nose job, and then after the fourth break working, I was like, nah. I'll just carry around these pencils and just straighten out myself.
2 times for me, but yeah, same thing. It's like you get that little deviation, the scar tissue that builds up in there. Got to get a septoplasty done because I got to the point I couldn't even breathe out of my nose.
I used to whistle at night for about half a year, and then I got my nose broken for the 8th time. And
by your wife, who said I've had enough of this.
Yeah, somebody did, maybe. I don't remember exactly who did it, but. A lot of the aspects of the work that we do now is, advocacy, is speaking out on a lot of these things. I know there's not a lot of people like me out there in the U.S. right now that have a voice. When
you say you're advocating, but what things are you specifically advocating and speaking out about? I know you're talking about the training the fighters, but what are the issues that are most important to you that you want to talk about?
First off, awareness of some of the loss and death that happened in Mexico versus the stuff that's happening in the United States. Like I raised a bit over $4,000 for the Ryan Terry Foundation about 3 years ago. I did that to prove a point. One, I'm Mexican, and I raised that amount of money for a Border Patrol agent that was killed by some of the Fast and Furious guns.
Which we had Pete Friselli on, the ATF agent that was the whistleblower on that, yeah.
But nobody's talking about a lot of the people that are on my side that got killed by those guns. And nobody's raising money for them. 2 of my friends got killed by those guns, FN-57 pistols. One of them was shot outside of his house with his wife. And I think a big part of the big part of the conversation that I'm having out there is around the fact that we are not as separate as some people want to make us look out. I'm Mexican. I'm very conservative in my views. I love the fact that you can have a gun and you can take responsibility for yourself here in the United States. We're not that dissimilar politically. But something happens to the people that come after the first generation that make it here, and they get politicized and they start forgetting about where they came from and some of the issues that their families were fleeing. I think the vision is very hurtful for both sides of this issue. I came up here and did my immigration process during the election of Donald Trump, and it was not an easy process for me to kind of go through. There's definitely a lot of issues on both sides of the border that are very much regional. This whole aspect of build a wall and build it high is not going to work, and it hasn't worked in the past. And this whole aspect of open borders is not working as well and hasn't worked in the past. So what comes next? Well, on both sides of the border, we have basically trade partners. Second largest trade partner for the U.S., and Mexico very much depends on the remesas sent back from all the immigrant workers that are working in your industries, service industries, and farms, and a bunch of others.
Western Union sends a ton of money across the border.
So we're basically dependent on each other. Illegal immigration is illegal because it has to be according to the powers that be. there is violence that happens across the border, and there's violence that happens in the United States. The cartels are very much within the United States operating. It's not a foreign issue. It's happening. The Sinaloa cartel was probably born in Los Angeles. So a lot of these issues have been not only politicized, but also been cut down a straight line as being a Mexico problem and a U.S. problem. The U.S. has been installing presidents in Mexico and putting them on the CIA payroll for at least the 50s on forward. We don't know exactly to when, because that's not going to be declassified until who knows when, but at least 2 presidents from the 60s have been known to be on that payroll. So that's something to think about as far as responsibility and how some of these things have come to happen.
If they're on the CIA payroll, who's paying them more money, though, the CIA or the cartels?
Well, I think that is an interesting question, and I think we should see where that line is, because there has to be a line somewhere, and we can talk to the people that lived through the Kiki Camarena situation to see what that line is. We don't know. I don't know. That's something beyond my experience. There's responsibility on both sides, and I think that's what I'm trying to advocate. That there is responsibility on both sides. Both sides have their hands covered in blood. But both sides also have a dependency on each other, which is so strange. There's the saying in Mexico, Mexico far from God, but close to the United States. That's a saying we have in Mexico, and it's sad to say that. We're united by blood. Tijuana's 90% of all new housing in Tijuana is being bought up by Americans.
Why?
Because Americans can't afford to live in California.
Oh, yeah. Okay, that point made there. Yeah, it's cheaper to go across the border, and
so all the screams about Mexico being very dangerous and gunshots and all that, and we have a shit ton of migrants from the economy living in Mexico.
I had to do a briefing for people that were going over to visit Israel for the first time, and so I said, "Let me give you a briefing." I said, "So, how would you react if I told you last weekend in Tel Aviv there were 17 people shot, 25 wounded, 4 killed, 8 killed? Would you guys go, oh, no, we wouldn't go? Yet every one of you would hop on a plane and go to Chicago the next day." I said, those were headlines from Chicago.
Yeah. I mean, there's issues on both sides. But I think as the economy is shifting, the globalism is gone. It's going away. China isn't your friend. Making things in China is probably not your best bet. But who has comparable abilities to build, construct, and supply the United States? Mexico.
And that's absolutely right. And they're looking at shifting. A lot of people have shifted to Vietnam and India for manufacturing stuff. Apple's actually looking at bringing stuff back here to do that because they depend on Foxconn and, too many people in China. Hey, I wanted to ask you, because you brought up something. Have you, I mentioned Pete Furselli's name, but do you know Pete Furselli, or have you ever talked with him?
I haven't. No.
Murph, this would also, because Pete's got a new book coming out, and it's called, he wrote an original book, but his upcoming book, The Deadly Path, How Operation Fast and Furious and Bad Lawyers Armed Mexican Cartels. That would be very interesting to get him and Pete on the same podcast, because Pete was the whistleblower on Operation Fast and Furious. He is on a mission to expose the corruption that happened on that side, and he got targeted because of that.
Yeah. I mean, I have a picture with some of those guns that we found buried in a backyard inside of a water barrel in Baja. The federal government in Mexico was probably involved in that in some way, or knew about it at a high level. I think Luna probably knew about it in some way, shape, or form. From our end, we learned that it was an operation that stemmed back to the Bush administration. I don't know if it's true or not, but that's the briefing that we got later on about it.
I think there were always operations to try and trace these things. I think where things went south, figuratively and literally, is when they decided to let these guns walk and just see where they ended up, as opposed to, I mean, Murph, we talked about even with DA, right? I mean, you guys would not let 100 kilos walk.
No. I mean, you can't even let an ounce walk without getting approval from the Attorney General.
Yeah, we were seeing in the box 50 cal Barretts with the instruction manuals. We were seeing P90s, FN57s, like something a kid would order online for their new cartel, basically stuff that they couldn't get or couldn't figure out what to get. So FN-57s and P90 used a specific round, and they quickly realized that the round was harder to get than the rifle. So it wasn't even done in a smart way. So it was basically, hey, what guns do you need? These, cool. And also, there's a free pass going on right now, so like get the most of them that you can. Everything and clearly coming from the U.S. because a lot of these things were pawned and or sold with Magpul Dynamics stuff on them, civilian switches on them, basically automatics, which are meaningless in Mexico. You can machine that part quickly and just drop it in and turn them into full autos. But it was clear everything was coming from the U.S. and it was like day and night flooding of weapons, of new out of the box stuff with the EOTechs on it.
Well, a reporter got a hold of a internal ATF email, but it's apparently, well, I should say internal. It's going out to firearms dealers. Listen to this. It comes from ATF FFL alert. The federal firearms license. It's U for unclassified, so they're sharing it. But law enforcement is advising federal firearms licensees of expanding interest of criminal networks' intention to utilize straw purchasers in acquiring large caliber firearms such as 50 caliber and/or belt-fed rifles within the next 60 days. This activity is anticipated to occur through the entire state of Texas. Please contact your local ATF offices. Blah blah blah. This is ongoing, and now they're, like you say, they're crossing the border just like they did with marijuana. We had an episode with a guy named John Norris, who was a conservation officer in California. You know John?
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. We had him on. Yeah, talking about the impact, the environmental impact the cartels have had out in California, the billions of waters. To your point, you can make it legal all you want. Well, now the cartel is crossing over. Not only that, but you see things like this, and you wonder, are they just going to arm up on this rather than trying to, they just trying to bring guns across the border? They'll just come over here and buy them legally or, illegally, but they're going to arm up on this side.
Yeah. I mean, I think we're heading into this no return zone. The border right now is being controlled by two or three organizations, but there's no large swath of it, important swath of it next to a giant drug market that is controlled by the new generation cartel. Not yet. They're working on it in Baja. When that happens, now there's a corridor for them to move and grow within the United States. There's a case to be made about gang violence lowering itself in the United States in the early 2000s because of the Sinaloa cartel dominance in drug markets in the U.S. There's a case to be made because of that. Because they went in and basically said, chill out. We're in charge now. This is how we supply and distribute. There's a few other competitors out there. Yeah, I know. But there's a case to be made for the fact that they came in and calmed things down because there's no longer like a real competition as far as distribution from Mexico. What's going to happen when the new generation cartel has a clear footing into a large dark market like California? Competition. That's what you see in Mexico. Mexico's violence is because local drug markets are being fought over and distribution routes. That's the violence in Mexico. The next step is for that to happen in the United States.
It's amazing that the cartels haven't figured that out themselves in Mexico. Because if they did join forces and stick together, and I know it's egos in the way and greed, all the factors that go along with that, but they would pretty much be unstoppable.
I think these two organizations, the Sinaloa cartel and the New Generation cartel, are at odds in as far as being able to ally themselves. There's too much blood already spilt between them. I think the danger is if they make it to the U.S. and have a clear pathway into it, basically the control of a large section of the border wall and what goes under it and through it, drug tunnels, et cetera. Now you have a group that can arm itself and operate itself on both sides of the border without the scrutiny of the United States seeing how they're moving. And also, now they're going to be competing in a very direct way within the United States for markets. So you're going to see high-level hits being carried out in places like U.S. You already see them. That's already happening. But like high level, like 40 people showing up to a town to execute somebody, more armed incursions into the United States from Mexico, which is already happening. People on the Texas border can tell you about this more than I can.
We had border agents being shot at, law enforcement officers, being shot at. I mean, it's the rounds coming across the border just increasing.
Yeah, but now imagine that's one cartel operating on the border, basically fighting off the Border Patrol. Now imagine two cartels fighting each other and the Border Patrol in the middle of that. It's going to be an interesting open warfare setting. It's already happening in certain ways on the border in Baja and other parts of Texas where there's conflict for the border, and all that's going to be as far as an option is containment. But again, the cartels are already in the United States. I mean, Operation Anaconda, I think, arrested about 80 members of the New Generation Cartel in a sweep they did probably 4 years ago or something like that. And, I've traveled across the country, and every now and then I get people from some agencies sending me pictures of equipment of clandestine altars to Santa Muerte or to Malverde. And basically I'm tasked to, hey, what do you think these mean? Because that's another part of my consultant efforts. And I can tell them, like, well, this altar is basically made by a Jalisco member. How do you know? Well, he's utilizing this, and that's a Jalisco thing. And they're carrying around subguns and pistol calibers. That's a very specialized thing. And it's something I recognize from a certain group of people that we went after. So that's probably means that they're here. You start detecting stuff like that, and it's already happening. This is already here.
In our conversations with John Norris, it just boggles your mind that the legislators in the different states that are in favor of legalization don't do any research first. There's no attempt to see what are the potential consequences if we do this. All they're seeing is tax dollars. They can throw out the idea that this will stop Mexican marijuana coming across. No, it's not. And we've had a former member of the Mexican Mafia on here twice. Goes by the street name of Mundo. You probably know him. And he's telling us that the Mexican Mafia is playing the California legislation like a fiddle, and they're too naive, or their egos are in the way, and they won't admit it.
Yeah, I mean, in Colorado, they're utilizing the loopholes around the money movements around marijuana to basically launder a shit ton of money for the cartels. They're already there figuring that out. Right, so it's a game of it's a game of chess, and they're very much involved in it. And I've been in Seattle and witnessed federally funded crack pipes and needles being filled with heroin from hillsides in Mexico that I've been to. So as somebody I went through a lot of scrutiny to be in the U.S. And to migrate, and a lot. And I pay my taxes, and I have 4 employees, and I do my best to make my environment better, and I try and help out anybody I can. And I very much consider me being in the United States a responsibility more than a privilege. And going there and going there and posting about it, my post got taken down by Instagram when I said, it's amazing to me that I'm in Seattle witnessing a bunch of needles on the ground that were federally provided being filled with fentanyl from China that was sent to Mexico and was grown into heroin and put into heroin, and then it's up here, and now the ground's littered with this, and somehow the U.S. is trying to figure out if cartels are a terrorist organization or not, and somehow they're involved in a drug war, which I was a part of for years.
It's a joke.
It's hard for exactly. For me, it's that somebody had lost a lot for this. When I say a lot, I mean I lost a home. I lost a bunch of my friends. I lost a lot of sleep and a marriage, all because of this giant conflict. And I still think that there is something to be done. I just don't know who's going to be able to do it with the extent of corruption that I see at different levels. And yes, corruption is something, it's commonly known of in Mexico, but it's also in the United States in a big way.
Again, nobody's immune to it. Well, look, let's make you HMFIC for a year, right? What would Ed Calderon, HMFIC, you familiar with that term?
No.
Head motherfucker in charge. You are HMFIC. You are the czar. I mean, it's like, what is the plan we come up with? How do we come up with it? And how do we do it in such a way? Look, I'm not naive enough to think we get rid of everything, but how do we get it back down to a point to where people, communities can thrive without being dependent upon the cartels? How do we stop this transnational shipment, of fentanyl, things like that? How do we address the cartel issue? So you're HMFIC for a year. What would His Excellency Ed Calderon do if you had the power to do it?
Naval blockade and search and seizure of every single ship coming from China into Mexico, number one. That would be the priority thing, to basically cut the supply chain from China into Mexico. It's a national security thing. I don't know what the legalities of that would be. I've heard and seen Trump basically do something similar on the Atlantic side of the ocean during an operation where the Navy was very much involved doing counter-narcotic stuff on that side of the ocean, and I saw the effects that had. Number one, I would first off clearly designate that China was not our friend in that aspect and is very much a sponsor of this effort being done to the United States. Their banking industry and their industry in general is being utilized as a tool of mass destruction in the United States. So basically have a conversation about that and do something about it first. Some sort of Navy blockade and or sort of Navy search and seizure of these ships coming in and out of Mexican ports. That's number one. Number two, I think we're past any sort of solution that involves the Mexican federal government. I mean, I think there's two heads on two sides of the same snake, cartels and government. It's hard to tease them out where one stops and where one begins. I think there's no clear solution that involves the Mexican government as it is right now. I don't see it. And when I say the Mexican government, the military is very much involved in this. And I mean, we have somebody here that talked about and worked with them for a while, and not just myself, that was involved in some of these conversations. I'm sure you got the impression that an American friend of us, I think this from the Departed movie, told us this once when he was working with us in Mexico. He said, "Hey, so what do you know about these guys?" It's like, not a lot. It's like, you do know something more, right? Yeah. But we're taking the treating you like mushrooms, feed them shit and keep them in the dark aspect of it. I don't think they're to be trusted realistically, and we can go back in history to see all of the amounts of times that have been compromised and people and information has been switched. I mean, El Chapo Guzman's head of security was a member of the elite GAFE special forces of the military. So that's something that doesn't get talked about a lot. This is a situation, I think, that is beyond any sort of program implementation, working with or trying to figure things out of that nature. I think on my end, I could be wrong, but I don't see anything other than an open conflict in the future for both sides. I mean, there's something that's coming, and I think we're beyond any sort of policy that involves liaison, coordination, counter narcotic stuff. I mean, the United States has been paying for that drug war for decades. When I first got on the job, the best effort the federal government can do is put a bunch of guys in the back of a truck and patrol the streets. That was almost 20 years ago now. What do you think they're doing right now with that taxpayer money that's being sent down there for this Plan Medi, that they call it, paying for a lot of these police cars and fuel and salaries and weaponry? They're doing exactly the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Same thing. Nothing has changed.
Mm-hmm. So as U.S. tax paying people, as we are, why don't we audit where that money is being spent and why nothing has changed, and actually why things have gotten worse?
We could be talking about Mexico or Ukraine. Yeah.
Well, we've got an organization that's responsible for that, but the hell, they can't even pass a budget for the United States government, which 20 years from now, we know on September 30th, we need a damn budget in place.
Yeah, I'm trying to think how long that's been the case, Murph. I mean, I know when you were in government, before, it's like
forever.
October 1st, the beginning of a new fiscal year. Let's have something in place by September 30th.
Outrageous.
Yeah.
Outrageous. Hey, we're becoming the laughing stock of the world here.
But is it a slow slide into oblivion, or is there an end game here that if we can do some things now, we can reverse where we're at again? Never get to the point of where everything's hunky dory, but could we get back to the point to where we can neuter the cartels the same way you felt like your team got neutered? You were brought in, and is there a way to neuter them, or are we past the point with that? Too much of the toothpaste is out of the tube now?
I think too much of the toothpaste is out of the tube. And I think too much of Latin America is no longer your friends, including Mexico and several segments of society in Mexico. Trump did a lot of good things and did a lot of bad things. And I think one of the biggest mistakes he made was making an enemy out of a whole country with his rhetoric. It stuck, and people have been utilizing that against U.S. interests for the past decade, I guess. There's no better place to, like, when talk about social economic decline and all that stuff in the U.S. being on the downward. I see it. I feel it. I was in the United States for the Council of Police effort, and I go to different training academies across the country, and I see the empty rooms and the lowering of standards, and nobody wants to be a cop anymore in the U.S. and places where there's no cop responses, and I could see that. But still, there's no other place I would rather be, even with all that. And I'm an immigrant, and I've been through some shit. And I recently talked to a friend of mine who left Mexico and joined the IDF. He was part of an elite border team that did direct action missions in some gnarly places. Amazing dude. He, again, a Mexican immigrant, went to Israel, fought a war out there, and then moved to the United States. And I told him, like, what's the American dream? And he says, it comes in stages. Number one, get a truck. Number two, build a gym in your garage. And number three, guns. Right? And I was like, what? It's like, why do we as immigrants see that? And I think it's basically having a government or a constitution that gives you that responsibility. And I think it's a responsibility. It's not a right. It should be focused on more as a responsibility. The responsibility to keep yourself safe and keep your family safe, and also to be able to maintain the ability to do that. So a gym and a gun range, so you can maintain that ability.
And a big ass truck.
There's no other place on the planet that allows you that. And I think that is what we're fighting for. And that's what I'm fighting for too. I want my daughter to be able to see that when she's older.
We challenge our listeners to, not all our listeners, but anybody that is unhappy living here in the United States, go live in a third world country. Just go down for a year and then see if that changes your opinion.
If you're anti-gun, go down to Michoacan and have a cartel member show up and say which one of your pretty daughters he wants to take out for a night. And be the guy in that conversation without a gun.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And again, I've been in places like that, so that's why I moved to Texas.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we have very short memories here in the United States. It's, we saw what happened at 9/11, and it actually galvanized our country, but it didn't last very long, did it?
And then it wears off. And to your point, you get amnesia, you get fatigue. People forget what happened, and we go through this all again. Look, I can't think of a better way to kind of bring this to a close. Those three things, right? Guns, a gym, or a big truck, a gym, and guns, right? That's got to go on a T-shirt somewhere. Hey, but we would be remiss. Let's finish off by talking about edsmanifesto.com. What are these things the public signs up for? Is this law enforcement? Tell us about your organization and what you're providing.
Yeah, I provide consultancy for companies, federal agencies, the military, you name it. I've worked with them. I have a wealth of knowledge, and I don't want it to go to the grave with me. And instead of writing a book or selling this stuff online, I legit want to go out there and share it directly to people. So I do classes across the country as well. They're open to the public. I post them on my website, edsmanifesto.com. We show people how to survive in places that are not friendly to your presence there. So we've trained people that are involved in Doctors Without Borders, people going off to war zones to report on the news, people that just want to go to places that are kind of scary and they want to be prepared for it. So we go into that type of training for people, and if people are interested, they can go on our website and see what that's about. And we also run a Patreon page where I share a lot of the online training material. So if people can't go out to a class, they can join us there. And where I share a lot of the on the road antics we get into. Like, I legit am a new member of the American experience, and I make it a point to go and learn from everybody and anybody that wants to show me things that are related to this experience. So,
well, I'm going to give you a clue. If you ever go to Minnesota or the North Countries up there, do not eat lutefisk.
Lutefisk. I remember eating. So, a few experiences that I had. I went to Tennessee. I went to Tennessee and I saw a bunch of people dancing with snakes. Those snakes are real. It's not a trick. Amazing experience. Americans go to Mexico to go to bullfights and cockfights. I'm Mexican. I went to the went to see a bunch of white people dancing with snakes. Amazing experience. Then I went to Phoenix and I saw a bunch of people hanging themselves from metal hooks and got to experience that. That was amazing.
Seen that. Yeah.
And then I go to machine gun shoots and SHOT Show and anime conventions and comic conventions, and go to speak to universities about what's happening in Mexico, and get yelled at by people that are 3 generations into this country and forgot about all that, and they're calling me a warmonger or some bullshit like that. It's been an amazing experience. I'm grateful for all of it. There is no other place in the world where I would rather be. And even with all the flaws that it has, and that should say something to people.
I'm looking at your Instagram account here. You've got 328,000 followers here. So folks, check him out at Ed's Manifesto. Do you still have a podcast?
Yeah, it's a Manifesto Radio podcast that's on YouTube. I basically go and speak to people that are like me, that went through the whole experience of coming up in a bad place, fighting for it, or fighting somewhere and coming back from it, and kind of showcasing some of their experiences. I've had members of Dev Group on that now run Heroes for Horses programs where veterans come back and
PTSD. Yeah, absolutely. Great. Those animals are just magnificent.
To the guy that I arrested on murder charges in Mexico, and now we're friends, Conejo, a rapper who kind of turned his life around. And I recently had Lisa Ola on, my former boss, and we talked for about 4 hours about some of the stuff we went through. So if people want to kind of check out that side of my story, it's out there on YouTube at Manifesto Radio Podcast.
Is that in English or Spanish?
Both. Okay. I can do both.
No kidding. You speak Spanish? Yeah. Okay.
I could speak Spanish with a gringo accent. You want to hear that?
Yeah, let's hear it.
Mucho gusto. Mi nombre es Ed Calderon. Me gustaría decirles que Chipotle es el mejor restaurante de comida mexicana. There you go. Enjoy that.
Chipotle, that's Chipotle. Chipotle. That's the way the gringos say it.
Chipotle, tortillas, and all that.
Tortillas and donde es baños there, amigo?
Every now and then I travel into Mexico, I'll switch to that accent and I get treated really differently.
I ate at Chipotle last night down in Miami.
Yeah, and you're paying for it too, pal. I saw you run to the bathroom 3 times during this podcast. If you want botulism, you know where to eat it. Hey, but first of all, dude, thanks you for doing this. This is us saluting you.
Absolutely.
Thank you for your service to your home country. Thank you for your service to this country. Bienvenidos. Welcome to the United States. Estado de Unidad. Appreciate the fact that you did it legally. You've gone through the slings and arrows. You know what it's like, and gives you the credibility to talk about the stuff. But what I really appreciate more, a lot of times cops, they want to hold on to stuff. It's my information. I don't want to share. You're one of those great exceptions to the rule of where you want to share everything you know with everybody and make everything better. And huge thumbs up to you for doing that.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that, Ed. It's been an honor to have you on here. I know you're a busy man. We had to wait quite a while to get you on here, so thank you for giving us the time. But also, just like Morgan said, sharing the information you have to American law enforcement, American operators, so that it may help them somewhere down the road to save their lives. So, you're becoming a patriot here in the United States. I'm glad to have you up here with us.
I wish I could do more, and trust me, like every now and then I go out to show some of the young guys that are going off to different places to just, put boot to ass. it was very costly to get some of this experience. And I can't, for the life of me, think about going to the grave with it. So God bless America. God save Mexico. And thank you for having me on.
And God bless you.
You perfect way to end this. So you don't go anywhere. Everybody else, stay tuned for the debrief. I'll tell you what is deceptive about Ed.
What's that?
Is that he's kind of quiet. He's not like, he doesn't yell and scream. He got emotional about some stuff, talking about the friends that he lost, but he is deceptively smart. And what I mean by that is that a lot of people will watch him maybe move and think, kind of slow, kind of nice guy. But what he's done, what he's looked, what he's figured out, man, and what he went through, and still maintained his sense of composure, his sense of decency, his sense of humanity. Can you imagine going through that, having that many of your friends killed, or living in a situation like that where the cartels are, you're dealing with them every single day?
Well, and then be presented with a situation where, okay, what are you going to do? Because your old boss is gone, you've got a new guy coming in that's potentially corrupt. And asking him to make a decision on the spot.
I wouldn't even say potential. I mean, all of this, when his boss left, everybody was on the take.
And his, and his decision was, he went and got in his car, he went home, got his shit, and he fled. I mean, how much closer to death can you come than that?
Packed up his wife, his kid, whatever he could carry in a duffel bag, and that was it. He left everything behind.
And I hope that the law enforcement or future law enforcement that's listening to this podcast, I hope you learn from him that he's continuing to learn. I used to say when I was still in the job, if you think you know it all already, but just because you've been on the job a long time, I don't want you working for me. I don't want you working with me, because you're going to get yourself or somebody else killed. The criminals are continually evolving. Ed makes it a point to learn from the criminals, because that's how you defeat them. The things that he found out, he took the time, and like you said, you just treated somebody with respect. Maybe you gave him a cigarette. Maybe you let him make a phone call. But that's how you learn from the evil element that's out there, so we can defeat them in the future. I love this podcast. This is outstanding.
Yeah, and I think we're going to team him up, like we said, with Pete Forcelli, because we want to talk about Operation Fast and Furious. His big mission in life is to talk about all the deaths on the other side of the border. When we got done, he says he's not getting those threats from the cartel. He worries more about the government and people trying to shut him up and keep him from doing stuff. But it's interesting. He said he'd love to talk to Eric Holder, who was the AG during Fast and Furious. And I know Pete Forcelli's got some strong opinions about AG Holder, about this whole Fast and Furious thing.
When Pete's book doesn't come out till March of next year, but I'm really looking forward to it. He sent me an advanced copy so I could read through the whole thing. And it is so eye-opening. And it's not just ATF leadership or lack of leadership. Wait till you read about the U.S. Attorney's Office, the negligence that was there, the big attitudes, the big egos that, I'm an attorney, you can't question me. I don't have time for you. When your decisions are resulting in deaths. But we're getting on a whole different topic here. I'm looking forward to having Pete back on the show.
Yeah. Well, and I think I think we get him and Ed on at the same time. That'll be a hell of a discussion.
I think you and I'll sit there and just be quiet and let those two talk.
So welcome to the show and say thank you for joining us, and that'll be our contribution.
Maybe one of the easiest ones we ever do.
Well, speaking of an easy thing to do, it's easy to have great guests on like this. So let's bring this to a close here. We hope you guys enjoyed that episode. If you did, head on over to Apple, Spotify, hit those 5 stars. Let us know what you think about it. It's magic. We don't know how it works. We just know it really helps us. Also, head on over to GameOfCrimesPodcast.com. That's where you'll find out about Ed's Manifesto.com, the book that he wrote, the things that are available. So make sure you head on over there. Follow us on that thing called social media at Game of Crimes on Twitter, Game of Crimes Podcast on Facebook and the Instagram. But make sure you join us at patreon.com/Game of Crimes. We have a ton of good content. We've got our Q&A coming out. We've got our case of the month that we just did. We've got we actually did our Narcometer review, Sicario, Day of the Soldado. That was one of the best movies I think we've seen since we started doing Narcometer.
It was a hell of a lot better than Miami Vice.
Fucking A.
Sorry about that, everyone. I've apologized like 1,000 times, and I guess I'll continue to.
Yeah, well, if you're not on Patreon, you won't understand what we're talking about. But we got a lot of concurrence that that hurt, that one hurt. But hey, we're not going to hold it against you. Only after another 3 or 4 months, we won't hold it against you. But hey, but seriously, head on over to patreon.com/gameofcrimes. That's where all the good stuff is. And we want to thank you guys. Thank you guys for joining us. Leave comments. Let us know what you think about it, because this is how we get these great guests. So thank you guys for playing along. Thank you guys for being players in the biggest, baddest, most dangerous game of all, the Game of Crimes.